Good evening. I'm Dr. Sharon Saline. It's great to have you with us today. We're going to be talking about school, all about school and ADHD, and I'm excited that you're here. I did receive some questions based on last week's webinar, and I just want to address these. These are from Dina. Hi, Dina. I know you can't be with us in a live fashion, so I'm hoping you're going to get this tomorrow, and this will help you. So Dina asked about complaining and anxiety, and what I want to say is we're going to be talking about anxiety in the 4th class pretty specifically, so I'm going to pause that question for right now. You also wanted to say that your child was diagnosed by an educational psychologist and medication wasn't on the list of recommendations. I would recommend that you consult with a child psychiatrist to get the best and most up-to-date information on medication and what might be helpful for your child. And then finally, how do you help a child make decisions? So again, we're going to deal with this in classes 3 and 4 more specifically. So I will hold on to your questions and we will come back to them. Now, today we're going to talk about what we can do to help manage school-related ADHD issues like learning disabilities, challenges in the classroom, and daily frustration. How can we set up home or school plans that promote success and positive self-esteem? And what types of accommodations should you arrange? And how can you reduce homework stress and create more effective studying? We will be talking about all of these things today. I want to remind you that if you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to email them to me in the chat area. And during the course of the class, when you have comments or questions for the group, please feel free to put them in there as well. I'm trying to generate as much as possible an online conversation. And it seemed like in the last class that the chat room was the best way to do that rather than people talking, because you can't see when someone's going to speak or speaking over them. So today we're going to talk about school issues. And of course, I just want to review the 5 C's because we're going to put the 5 C's into action with school issues. The first thing you're going to do is focus on self-control. So what I'd like you to think about is notice what triggers you and challenges you about your child and their experience at school. You're going to work with the school to pick one behavior that you would like your child to change because you're compassionate that people can only change one thing at a time. You're going to collaborate your child and the school. Justine, can you turn your, thank you. You're going to collaborate with the child and your school to create a plan together that works towards improving this, whatever their issue is. And in fact, over the weekend, I was at a conference in Baltimore, Innovators for Special Education, and Kathleen McClaskey was speaking there, and her entire presentation was about having kids who have learning challenges sit in on IEPs or parent-teacher meetings so they can have a say in what will be created for them. Number 4, we're going to work on being consistent by focusing on support in the form of noticing their efforts, redirecting kids when necessary, and referring back to your mutually agreed upon plan. You're going to create a feedback loop with the school so you know what's happening each week or even each day in some conditions. And finally, the last C is celebration, and we're going to celebrate any accomplishments towards achieving the goals that you've set, even if they're not fully completed. So that's our 5 C's review. Now let's talk about ADHD and academic challenges. So school is often the worst domain of functioning for children with ADHD. It's tougher for these kids to access what they know. ADHD, as we talked about, is a disorder of now. It's not a disorder of intelligence. People can't access what they know in a timely fashion, and it reflects difficulties with performance, not intelligence. But sadly, these two get confused for kids and sometimes for educators. The more severe your executive functioning challenges are, and we talked about this last time, the higher the likelihood is of a learning disability. Now, in elementary school, kids learn the process of reading. They learn a facility with numbers and basic arithmetic skills. And they learn how to write, the physical act of writing, and also the concept of self-expression. When these things are not mastered in elementary school, there is a prolonged difficulty. I worked with a teen who was not diagnosed with dyslexia until she was in 10th grade. She was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, and she had struggled in school for years. That is not something that I want to see you repeat with your kids, or for any kid for that matter. Now, as kids move through the elementary school years to the upper years, 4th, 5th grade, and then into middle school, and of course, high school, you read to learn. You use math for higher order thinking and problem solving. And you write not just for self-expression, but you write to analyze subjects. All of these skills, reading, writing, and mathematics, are all managed by executive functioning skills. And that's why kids with learning disabilities often have executive functioning challenges, as do kids with ADHD or high functioning autism. So one of the things that's challenging for these kids is the concept and ability to listen and take notes simultaneously. That is extremely difficult because it taxes working memory, it taxes staying in the moment, being really focused, and it's very difficult. It also affects your cognitive processing speed. And usually kids with ADHD have challenges with their cognitive processing speed and challenges with working memory. So this is a real setback and a problem for kids who have ADHD and a coexisting learning disability, or just have ADHD. Writing and taking notes, paying attention in class, and having to do something at the same time. We talked about last week how working memory is the computational space in your brain. You take something in and you do something with it. And so for these kids, that makes school very difficult. The other issue that's common among kids with ADHD is to have a slower cognitive processing speed. This isn't about lower intelligence. It's about how the brain takes in information and the speed with which it can metabolize, assign it to the right part of the brain, remember it, etc. So I'm not sure if I told you the story about one of my clients. I think I did, Carly, about the file. One file comes in her brain and the papers go everywhere. And the next file comes in and the papers go everywhere. And the third file comes in and the papers go everywhere. And she says she's so frustrated because she's working on picking up the papers from the first file. So that's the kind of slower cognitive processing speed I'm talking about. So other tasks that are demanded by school have to do with initiation, being able to get started on something, time management, assessing how much you can do in a given amount of time, planning, impulse control. All of these things help a student get through the day, not to mention emotional control, managing yourself and your frustration or your desire not to be where you are. And all of these skills help kids complete projects, papers, and tests. Kids with ADHD work so hard every day to hold it together at school, and they're doing the best they can there. And often when they come home, they struggle with homework because their brain is just exhausted from the effort it's expended during the course of the day. Many children of high IQ are often low achieving and inattentive in school. These are sometimes called twice exceptional kids, or 2E kids. And 2E kids often find school extremely challenging because they're bright and they're interested, but they're interested in certain things. Sometimes you'll see 2E kids who are also on the high functioning autism spectrum. For kids with ADHD, there's often a discrepancy between their natural strengths, cognitive strengths, artistic strengths, athletic strengths, and the intelligences that are being assessed in school, which are usually verbal and what's called logical mathematical. And so what happens is if you have a child whose strength exists in spatial kinds of awareness or spatial problem solving or kinesthetic, they'll struggle in school because what they naturally have an affinity for and a strength for isn't really used there. Kids with ADHD have something called a within-person difference in their intelligence. So that would mean they may process verbal information really well, but their working memory is far below that. And that happens about 35% of the time. Or they may process perceptual and visual spatial information really well, and their cognitive processing speed is lower. So everybody's brain is different, but it's important to understand that having differences in what's called your cognitive profile is normal. We all have differences. It's just the span of those differences for kids with ADHD is often significant and in many ways debilitating. So let's talk a little bit about ADHD and learning disabilities. So reading disabilities with ADHD occur between 33 and 45% of the time. Mathematics is between 20 and 30% of the time. And writing is the highest, between 57 and 65%. And that's because writing uses every one of your executive functioning skills, all 11 of them. And you have to have impulse control. You have to be able to sit and do it. You have to have emotional control. Can you tolerate the unpleasantness of the task? You have to plan. You have to sequence. You have to organize. You have to rely on working memory. You have to manage your time. You have to have a sort of a level of self-understanding to take your ideas and translate them into the written world. And so this is important to understand that if your child struggles in these areas, they are not alone. It's common. Now, schools are mandated to provide services under what are called individual education plans, or individualized education plans, or IEP, or 504 plans, which are accommodation plans. Now, in March, George DuPaul he's from Lehigh University, and he conducted the largest study of kids with ADHD to date, about 2,500 kids. And he found that 1 in 3 students with ADHD received no school-based interventions, and 2 out of 3 kids with ADHD received no classroom management. Think about that. That's really, really shocking. 1 in 5 students with ADHD who experienced significant academic and social impairment received no school intervention. Those are really high numbers. 1/3 of kids get no interventions generally. 2/3 of kids get no help with classroom management, and 1/5 of kids, 20% of kids with ADHD who are actively experiencing significant academic and social impairment are getting no school intervention. These gaps are especially evident for children and adolescents from non-English speaking or lower income families. Now, let's take a minute and think about something. What areas of school does your son or daughter enjoy? What areas do they dislike or struggle with? Take a minute and share some of that with us so we can get to know your child a bit. What do they love to do at school, if anything? And what areas are they really struggling with right now? Please type it into the chat so we can have a little bit of a conversation about that. I'll keep talking so you can reflect for a minute and then type it in. Is your child receiving services at school? And if so, are these services helpful? Let's see, Nina hates math, she loves art. Laura's son loves gym, computers, and art. Justine's child loves arts and reading, doesn't like math. So they have some areas that they enjoy. Kelly says, hold on a second. Chris says he loves art, music, and math. Kelly says he loves recess, snack time, gym, and really dislikes writing and math. And Janae loves history. So each of your children have something they love to do, they enjoy. Now for your child who likes gym and recess and math, that's okay. It's okay that those are the things that you like and that you're good at. But each of your kids loves to do something, and we want to lean into those interests and nurture them in school so that they can feel a sense of competence and accomplishment in those areas, and then shore up some of the more difficult areas for them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, math and reading respond very well to direct instruction, remediation, and it's important while your kids are in elementary school that they receive remediation services for math and reading, so they don't go into middle school still lagging significantly behind their peers. It takes longer to catch up once you get into middle school. Now, writing is more complicated. Because writing is something that is taught over the course of time. The demands on writing are different. ADHD medications have been found actually through research to improve all areas of disabilities, especially reading and math. And that has to do with both the working memory processes, but also the processing speed, that idea of the file and the papers. Alex, age 11, said to me, "I sit there for 15 minutes and not have a single thing on my paper because I'm thinking. And when the teacher says just write something, I can't get more than 3 words out. It's bad." Alex is 11 years old and already feels bad about himself that he cannot write efficiently like his peers. A lot of kids with ADHD have the ideas in their head and they can't translate them from here to the written word. Typing can be useful, but it's important for these kids to try speech to text applications that the school district could provide, or you could use on your computer as well. Those can be very helpful. Success for a student with learning disabilities requires a focus on individual achievement, individual progress, and individual learning, not comparisons to the rest of the kids in the classroom. This means that they may have to have specific, directed, and intensive remedial instruction for kids who are struggling. So what are some of the interventions that can help kids with some of these specific learning disabilities? So for dyslexia, audiobooks are very helpful. Pictures of directions and schedules, large print text, simple directions with keywords, colored strips or bookmarks to allow following along when reading, step-by-step instructions with one thing at a time, consistent daily routines, and that they are provided with notes during a lecture with the teacher so they can just listen. Pre-teaching material and handing that to kids can be also helpful. For kids who have difficulty with reading, it's really important that they don't have to listen and write notes. And that is true for many kids with ADHD, particularly those with writing challenges, but also true for reading because the sequencing processing is related. For what we call dyscalculia, which is a math-related challenge, we want to talk with kids about how to solve problems. Let the student write out charts or draw sketches to solve problems, as well as then applying a mathematic formula. Give a list of math formulas, use manipulatives, and create separate worksheets for word problems and number problems. This is really important because kids with ADHD in particular process, understand, and can achieve and can accomplish word problems differently than numerical problems. So let's separate them out because they may require different kinds of support. And it's important to talk about that with the teacher as well. For written expression, you've got to give kids extra time to take notes if you want them to take notes, or have a designated anonymous note taker in the classroom who can assist them by taking notes, and your child will receive a copy of those notes at the end of class using, carbon paper or whatever is helpful on the computer. Sometimes it helps kids to have a partner they're working with, because what I hear happens, and what kids tell me a lot, is they're in the course of a lecture, they'll be taking notes, and then they'll drift off. And they're not aware that they're drifting off until they come back and they realize the next thing that they're writing has nothing to do with the thing that's above it that they've already written. And so what I encourage kids to do is make a big circle there and just start writing again, and that to have time at the end of class to go back to the teacher and say, here's my circle, I missed this area, could you help me fill it in? Or to have a buddy that they can say that to. It's really important, and it's not shame-based. It's natural for kids with ADHD to go to the Bahamas a couple times while the teacher's talking about Benjamin Franklin in their minds. Or kids say they think about what's for lunch. So let's, instead of shaming them, let's try to set up a plan that acknowledges that that's going to happen, we predict it, and we plan for it. That kids who have struggle with writing have to start writing assignments early, and they need a specific step-by-step plan on what to do. This is super important. It's great for these kids to use keyboards for writing. Many kids with ADHD have a lot of difficulty with handwriting. Sometimes it's hard to read what they say, and that has to do with the motoric aspects of ADHD. Graphic organizers can be really helpful to kids if they make sense to them. I like the ones that are like a hamburger bun. I don't know if you've seen them. There's a bun at the top, and that's like for the topic sentence, and then there's the lettuce, and then there's the tomato and the meat, and that's all for the sentences underneath the topic sentence, and then the bun at the bottom is the concluding sentence. And this is really helpful because it's a step-by-step process, and it's a visual organizer that most kids can understand and relate to. Even if they're vegetarian, it could be a vegetarian burger. We want to help kids sometimes use Post-its. For some kids with ADHD, what was helpful for them when they have to write a paper or do a project is to sort of unload their ideas. And what is a better way to unload your ideas on a number of Post-its that you put up on the wall, and then you could arrange into an order of some sort of essay that makes sense. Again, for writing, text-to-speech software is super helpful, as I said, it is for e-reading. But also, having options other than writing a paper for your project. Can you do a PowerPoint presentation? Can you talk it out alone with the teacher to show your knowledge in this field? Let's try to think a little bit outside the box. Does anyone have any questions or comments here? Excuse me, I'm going to have some tea. Okay. It would be helpful for me to know how many of your kids do not have any accommodations or are at school or are not on an IEP. And if your kids are on an IEP or have accommodations, if those accommodations are helping them. So take a minute now and answer these questions. Does my child have accommodations? Yes or no? If yes, are those accommodations helping? If no, why not? Thank you. Chris, no accommodations. Okay. I'd love to hear a little bit about why. Rose has a 504 and just started middle school. Some are helping. Great, Justine. If you can tell me which ones are helping, I think that would be really useful to the group. Evan has an IEP. Is that working, Kelly? I'd like to know. Chris, school and teachers say he's doing okay academically. Well, often in elementary school, the elementary school teachers will sort of shore up a kid effectively enough so that a 504 isn't necessary, or an IEP. And then when they make the transition to middle school, we want to make sure that they get that. So let me see what else you're saying here. My daughter does. Some teachers use it, some teachers don't. They're supposed to use it, so we should talk about that. He has accommodations and it's helping. Great, Emily. Laura, no accommodations. He doesn't have a diagnosis. We did our Vanderbilt at school and school denied the concerns. Well, that is so distressing. Let's try to talk about that a little bit later, and maybe we'll turn our microphone on so you could explain that to me rather than having to type the whole thing out. Justine, Rose has 2 blocks a week of guided learning, which is small group executive functioning block. Bravo to your school district, because that is the best thing they can do for her. I'm about to talk about executive functioning skills. Kelly, he's made a lot of progress this year, but he's struggling in every aspect. That's really hard. You know, even if your child is moving along and is learning the skills and they're still struggling, it can be so discouraging. And really hard to kind of help them see that, you know, they're better than they were a while ago. I always encourage kids and parents every month to meet and then look backwards. It's like, I learned to ski when I was 39, and actually I don't ski anymore because I hurt my knee and that was that. But I learned to ski when I was quite a bit older, and my friend who was a ski instructor taught me, and you know, we're going down this hill and I'm like struggling, it's like a blue, and I'm like, oh, I hate this. And we get to the middle of the hill and he said to me, turn around and look where you've come from. And I turned around and I looked up the hill and I thought, oh my God, I came all the way down here. And that was so much more encouraging than looking forward at where I still had to go. And so it can be very helpful for kids with learning challenges to just sit down once a month, maybe with a teacher, maybe just on your own, and say, look at how much better you're doing. This is the progress that you've made this month. It really is important, and it works on that both the consistency and celebration. I see your efforting, I acknowledge you and what you're doing. Emily says, especially Learning Alley for audiobooks and Google Read Write for taking tests. That I'm so glad that he's using that for school. That can be helpful. Janae does not have accommodations. I asked for an IEP, but she didn't have a lot of issues at school, mostly at home. Yes, that can happen. Generally, everybody uses preferred seating, attention checks, and extended time. It's harder to have modifications and altered content delivery. It's really important, though, particularly in middle school, that the accommodations for how the content is delivered and how your child is, you know, understanding and taking that in is consistent across classrooms, but also that they're acknowledging that that's a problem for her. And Kelly, you said Evan is in Title I, which they just cut down from 5 days to 3, which I'm fighting. Good for you. Fight the good fight. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how and why it's important to educate kids with ADHD about their executive functioning strengths and challenges with a discussion that can help them identify these traits. Not only does it build self-awareness, which is so important, but it also offers the opportunity for compassionate feedback and rating scales. So there are rating scales that you can use online, or I would be happy to send you some if you're interested. I realize I didn't put those in your packet, so I will make a note if you want that from me. But it's a scale where you can actually rate yourself. Excuse me, I'm just going to make myself a note here, where you can rate yourself and your child can also rate themselves. In Smart But Scattered, Peg Dawson and Richard Guer's fantastic book and series of books, they have a number of these scales available to you, and those can be useful for a family discussion, for your child to sort of assess what they think they're good at, and for you to assess what you think they're good at and what their challenges are, and then to come together for a conversation. Oh, look, Mom, I'm really good at time management. It says right here. And you're not so good at time management, which is why you're always late to my soccer games. You can have a really interesting conversation about that as a family. And you can also help kids now understand why they're struggling. It's very important for these kids to start to understand what kinds of learners they are. You can't own your brain until you understand it. And being able to actually stand up for yourself and say, I need this or I need that, is part of the process of growing up with ADHD. So how can we help kids, improve their executive functioning skills in the classroom? So here are some classroom strategies that you can write down or talk to with the teacher. So again, we want to break learning into small steps. We talked about last time about initiation, and one of the challenges for kids with ADHD is if a task seems too big, they can't get started on it. So we want to supply regular quality feedback. We want to use diagrams and graphics and pictures to augment words. Sometimes kids with ADHD are visual learners. Let's try to figure out how we can incorporate that. So a flow chart can be useful rather than a list. You want to model instructional strategies that kids can follow. So that means that when a teacher says, okay, we're going to do a writing assignment, what are some of the tools you're going to need? You're going to need your organizing self. You're going to need your idea self. You're going to need a little bit of your planning self and your time management self. And if any of those parts of you need some support, raise your hand and I'll come over and help you. Too many teachers don't do this. And I really believe that executive functioning skills should be taught in the classroom alongside academic material, because many kids, and not just kids with ADHD, kids who have learning challenges, kids who are high functioning autism, and kids who are neurotypical can all benefit from understanding and applying these skills. So you want to provide prompts of strategies to use and engage students in the process by asking questions like, how is this strategy working? What else would you need? Where else could you apply this strategy? Now, the second thing that we want to talk about is scaffolding. So it's very hard for kids and teachers to know when to remove the scaffolding. It's hard for you as parents to know when to remove the scaffolding. And I see two basic problems. One, people hold scaffolding in place too long and they don't allow for enough independence. Or two, they remove the scaffolding too quickly, and so the skill actually isn't steady enough to exist on its own. So we want to help kids explore a skill, work on mastery, and then have them master that skill and continue to master it before removing the scaffolding, i.e. the supports at school, IEP, 504, any ways in which teachers are adding extra assistance. So how do we help kids at school improve their focus at home at school or at home with homework? Now, there are 4 types of focus: selecting, monitoring, hyper-focusing, and shifting. So people with chronic difficulties in attention have some areas in which they can pay attention with no problems. And those are usually areas of things that interest them. It's applying consistent attention and focus to things that are not interesting to them or not immediate rewarding that is where the trouble sets in. Focus is a dynamic process of choosing what is critical to notice or recall. It's like a flashlight. Notice where your attentional spotlight is. We want to help kids with ADHD build an awareness of where they're directing that spotlight and when. When kids drift off to the Bahamas or lunch in the classroom, they're not necessarily aware yet that the drift is happening. But what's interesting to me is the kids are aware when they come back. And that actually makes sense, right? So we want to help them start to notice when they're coming back, and then slowly to build the skill about when they're starting to drift off. That will take time. Maybe not until high school or later, because that's that self-awareness, and that kicks in, remember, at age 25 for neurotypical brains and 28 for ADHD brains. Do you have any questions right now about school intervention, accommodations, or focus? If so, please write them down in the chat room, because it seemed to me that some of your kids are not actually getting what they need, and I want to make sure that I can help you figure out what that is. So please go ahead and write that down if that's a challenge that you're having. Now, here's the one thing that I want to address. We've talked about motivating kids with ADHD, but before we dig down into motivation, I think we need to talk about multitasking. So I'd like to see by a raise of hands, how many of you think you can multitask? Me? I do. I think I can, even though I can't, and I'll tell you why. How many of you think you can multitask? If you think you can, just type it in. You can't? Hands up, Justine. Thank you. I can. Okay. So here's the thing. Multitasking actually doesn't exist in the brain. We do it anyway. We talk on the phone, we eat while we're eating, we talk on the phone while we're driving, we talk on the phone while we're cooking dinner. We do different things at the same time. We watch TV and we, try to pay our bills. We're constantly multitasking. 81% of teens in a study that was done 9 years ago by the Kaiser Family Foundation and has not yet been replicated, reported media multitasking. Now, media multitasking is absolutely the worst kind of multitasking. Why? Because it slows productivity, it changes how kids learn, and it can actually increase superficiality in social relationships and a shorter attention span. Because what you're doing when you're media multitasking, or actually regular multitasking, is you're splitting your attention. It's particularly worse with media because we do it much faster. So every time you switch your attention from one thing to another, we use up glucose in our brains. And glucose is our food, right? We eat food and it's digested, and we turn it into blood sugar, and that's how we survive, right? That's our fuel. So when we're multitasking, we're using up extra glucose in our brain, and what happens is our brain starts to feel stressed, and so it releases the stress hormone of cortisol. This makes us feel overwhelmed and depleted because we actually physiologically are. As we're switching, we're not concentrating on either task particularly well. And so you need a mental warm-up of anywhere from 7 to 15 seconds to resume the suspended task. Your efficiency goes down. Now, media multitasking really prevents kids from integrating new information efficiently, and they become more focused on these short bites of information. And actually, when you're in school, there are longer bites. There are chunks that you have to really, chew on and digest. So we're going to talk about a little bit today about how to decrease media multitasking during schoolwork, but we're also going to talk about technology in class 4. So how do we motivate kids with ADHD? This is the fundamental question where school is concerned, where chores are concerned. Or today we're going to talk about school. So ADHD brains need things to be interesting to accomplish them. And the ability to derive an inherent satisfaction from a task, from completing a task, doesn't emerge until late adolescence or early 20s. And so if you add 3 years to that for kids with ADHD, it's early or mid-20s. And that means that you have an internal sense of satisfaction in doing something that doesn't actually have a lot of inherent pleasure. So interest fosters motivation. And there are two types of motivation: extrinsic, which is outside of you, and intrinsic, which is inside of you. Extrinsic motivation refers to an outside request, reward, or responsibility that depends on achieving a goal. For example, if you don't bring in your permission form, you cannot go on the field trip to the zoo. Intrinsic motivation means striving toward a goal for personal satisfaction or accomplishment. You attempt to break your record on a favorite computer game. Using incentives that matter to kids, including time with you, is the best way to build extrinsic motivation. And incentives are not bribes. When there's no clear immediate satisfaction or benefit from a task, kids with ADHD will struggle to do it. Sometimes adults will struggle to do it. I don't know about you, but I have to do my dishes before I watch my TV show, or otherwise I'm not going to do my dishes, because after my TV show, I'm not going to feel like it. So I need to do the icky thing first and then reward myself with the thing I enjoy. It's the same for kids with ADHD, only you have to multiply it by like 10 million, okay, because of the dopamine deficiency in their brains. Now, an external incentive or reward encourages kids to do something that they may not particularly enjoy until the internal reward kicks in. The "because I said so" intimidation approach of our parents' generation, or perhaps of a particular teacher, may get the job done, but it doesn't teach kids with ADHD any lasting skills. And these kids really need lasting executive functioning skills. So what we're going to do is create incentives that matter to them, and that's a collaborative process. How do you do that? So we're going to brainstorm ideas about incentives, things that would get them going, a reward, without judgment or a grimace. You know, we're going to make a list and we're going to write it down. And they can't all be things that you buy, because we don't have enough money for that. So they have to be things that you can do together, or a privilege. And be open to your child's ideas and willing to try them. Refrain from discussing any of these options when someone is upset. You have to expect, regardless of whatever plan you create, to renegotiate and alter the programs as part of the trial and error learning process that's so important for development. You're going to check in regularly to assess their progress, and you're going to allow yourself to be pleasantly surprised when something works. Celebration. So, what are some tips for improving specific executive functioning skills directly related to school? Let's start with the hardest one: initiation, beginning. You're going to break a task into small pieces. Procrastination comes in two forms: avoidance procrastination and perfectionism procrastination. So avoidance procrastination is when you really do everything you can except the task at hand. And perfectionism procrastination is when you want something to be just right, and until it's just right, you're not going to do it. Both types of procrastination are debilitating. So the way that we avoid procrastination is we take a task and we break it down into small chunks, and no chunk is too small. If you still cannot get started on a task, it's too big. So maybe I can't do all my dishes, but I could clear the table. That I've broken the task down. Or maybe I could clear the table and put the food away. So we want to figure out how we can break the chunks down into something that seems doable. And this has to be a conversation with kids, because kids actually have ideas about what the achievable parts are. I worked with one girl who absolutely hated to do homework in sections of time. She wanted problems. She wanted tasks, and that worked better for her. She would do 5 tasks and then take a little break, and 5 more tasks and take a little break. So you want to have a daily guideline of what to do and how to get started using notifications. But first, what you want to do is look at the homework plan in general. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. I want to just let you know how we are going to do that. So what we're going to do is actually think about, how does your child like to do homework? Now, most of you may say doesn't like to do it at all, and that's fine. But kids have a particular way of learning, of doing their homework. And this usually means that they have an order that would make sense to them. Now, I would like you to think for a minute and write this out for us, please. When you have a task to do you like to do the hard part first and get it over with, and then maybe the medium part or the easy part, or reward yourself with something easy and then do something medium? Or do you like to start with something easy, get yourself in the groove, then do the hard part, then do the medium part? I generally like to start with something easy just to get warmed up, and then I dig right into the hard part, and then I save the medium thing for last. I'm curious, what do you think you do? Share with us, please. I'd really like to know. What order do you do things? We have to help our kids identify this order, and most kids can do that. Even little kids can say, I don't like math, I want to do it first. Okay. Or I don't like math, I want to do it last. How's that working? One of the challenges, no, you guys aren't writing anything. Come on. Thank you, Kelly. You do the hardest task first. Anybody else? Hard, easy? Easy or quickest first? Yeah. Okay. Start with the easy stuff to be able to scratch more things off the to-do list. Great. I like to get started with medium and then hard and then easy at the end when you're tired. Awesome. So I worked with a girl, and she had what she called a foggy brain. Donna, you like to do the easy thing. Wonderful. She had what she called a foggy brain. And so she took medication. And so she actually wanted to do the hardest thing first. Now, for her, hard wasn't math. Loved math. Hard was social studies. Hated social studies. Also really disliked science. So we decided that those were the things she would do first when she still had medication in her brain. And then she would leave math, which was the easiest, last, and writing would be in the middle. So I would ask you to try to make a note, to have a conversation with your child. What's the order that they like to work? And what assignments fall into that order? Because it's all about what's easy, medium, or hard for them, not what we think. And we can also share, of course, what we see, what we observe. So we're going to do this, and this is going to help us create the ideal order of doing work. That helps with initiation, because we can now figure out what is the order of how we're going to do homework. Now, the next thing that we have to think about when we're talking about motivation is time management. So time responds really well to direct instruction and cues, because the ADHD brain has a now, not now brain. And so external clocks, reminders, timers, alarms, these can be helpful. But kids with ADHD really need to see time move. And that's an analog clock. A time timer, which I don't think is very expensive and you can order online, is a great tool because it shows, it basically, you set the timer for 45. So the clock faces white, and then you set it for 45 and it's red. And as time goes by, the red disappears. So your child can watch time move. It's very hard for kids with ADHD to internalize the feeling of time. It's hard for many people to internalize the feeling of time. And so watching time move on an analog clock or a time timer can be helpful. This helps kids. Now, the thing is, we also want to teach kids how to understand what distracts them. So I had a client and she made an F box. And I said, what's that? And she said, it's a box of things that effing distract me. And I just laughed out loud. I thought that was hilarious. And so she had a list that she, had on a Post-it on her computer. And every time she sat down, she pulled the Post-it out, and she could see what was on the F box and what she had to manage. That's a great idea to do with your kids. Put it on the refrigerator, put it wherever you can, and bring it out when it's time for homework. This will help them with sustained attention. So we want to teach kids how to really externalize time and use it to their advantage. So, and that way they can be as intentional about what they're not going to do as what they are going to do. So one thing that can help kids is backwards design. And we'll talk about this more next time. But essentially, backwards design is I have an hour to do my homework. It's going to take me roughly how long to do my math? That'll be 20 minutes. So now I have 40 minutes left, and I have, and then I have to take a break because I know that my child cannot work that long. So we take a quick water break, bathroom break, snack break. 5 minutes later, we come back, we do another 15 minutes. And how do you come up with these periods of time that your child can work? I will tell you in a minute. And then you do the last 15 minutes and you're finished, or whatever, with the hour. So how do you come up with how long your child can work? Well, that's a conversation to have with your child, of course. I've asked kids flat out, how long do you think you can work before you need a break? Some kids will say 5 minutes, and some kids will say maybe 10 or 15, depending on the type of ADHD they have, if their medication's working, if they're interested in the topic. It's great to give them some feedback about what you notice, how long they can work, and also to talk about this with a teacher. And so then to determine how much work they can do in a given evening. Because if the teacher's assigning more work than your child actually can do, then there needs to be an accommodation written into a plan for them. So most kids in elementary school with ADHD can concentrate somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes. In middle school, it's more like 20 to 40 minutes. And in high school, it's anywhere from 30 minutes to a little over an hour. That means that you have to come up with a homework plan. And the homework plan is something like this. There's an incentive at the end of the homework period that matters to them. Maybe it's that's when they earn their screen time. Maybe you play a special card game, you work on a puzzle, you go down in the basement and play ping pong, you read a story together, you shoot some hoops, whatever it is. They earn that at the end of their period. And if they're not able to complete their homework, then they earn the privilege of doing something with you. It just may not be what's on their list. It's on your list. So there's still time with you. We're not eliminating that as a reward. It's just different time with you. So maybe they're helping you with something. Essentially, what you have to do is create what I call family work time. That means you're at the kitchen table at the same time that they're at the kitchen table doing their work. They're doing their work, and you're doing whatever bazillion things you could get done during that time. And I know that you all have things to do in your lives and not enough time to do them because that's the society we live in today. Excuse me. So at family work time, you're there to be a resource for them, and you're also there to keep them on track. So let's say that you have a child who can work I'm going to go back to my foggy brain girl. So we decided that she was 12 in 6th grade, and an hour was the maximum amount of time she could study. So we worked with her father, and he was the one who sat with her. She did 20 minutes. She took a 5-minute break that was agreed upon in advance. So you'll see a pattern with me. I'm all about kind of discussing and doing some planning in advance for things to avoid, crisis, conversations, arguments, meltdowns. So she works for 20 minutes. You set a timer for that. The timer goes off. She has a break. of an agreed amount of time with a particular activity or set of activities she can choose from. So maybe that's jumping jacks, maybe that's getting a snack, maybe that's going to the bathroom, petting the dog. In some cases, it can be checking your phone, but that is can be a very dangerous territory because you can go down the rabbit hole and then you can't get off the phone. So if your child can exhibit appropriate levels of starting and stopping with their phone, that's fine. I had a kid, in his 5 minutes, he wanted to watch a YouTube video. That was what he wanted to do, a YouTube music video. And he did that, and he was able to abide by the 5-minute limit when the alarm went off and the parent looked at him and said, that's 5 minutes. So you set up a plan, 20 minutes, 5 minutes of reward, 15 minutes, 5 minutes of reward, 15 minutes, you've now completed the hour of studying, close to it, and you get the bigger incentive. And this is what helps kids get through. Your presence there assists them not only in staying on track, but you're there in case they have any questions about their homework. Not to do their homework. Their homework is theirs. And it's important that they turn in the homework that they're actually producing so that the school and teachers can see what level where they are, the level where they are and where their struggles are. That's very important. So we're going to teach time management. We're going to teach kids about what distracts them, how to kind of stay on track, and we're going to really facilitate sustained attention by reducing these distractions and creating realistic work periods. We're going to help with organization. What this means is that I would like you to think about self-smart organizational systems. How does your child organize themselves? Now, some of you may say, not at all. There's just no organization. But most kids have a way of kind of thinking about things, even it's pretty idiosyncratic. Some kids like to have a notebook with their subjects in the order that their classes are. Some kids like to have colors. Math is red. Social studies is blue. And some kids just do it alphabetically. Let's try to find out what the system is for your child around organizing their notebook, their backpack, and how you can assist them. It's reasonable to expect that you will have to assist them in organization up until and potentially through high school. I worked with a 5th grader, and once a week, they had to clean out their desks at school. And this child could not do it on his own. And he was very embarrassed about this. And so what happened is that during desk cleanup, he worked on kind of organizing the inside of his notebook, which he was able to do. And then his father would come in after school, and together they would work on desk organizing. So he would be able to come back to school on Monday with an organized desk. Over time, he started to adapt the systems of organization that he and his father developed, and he started to learn how to do this on his own, slowly. And he had a checklist, laminated checklist that was taped to the front of the top of his desk, so he could look at that for desk organization. And he slowly did this. So then father came every other week. Then father came once a month. And that's where that's what continued for the rest of the year. So by March, father was coming once a month. We want to help kids have ordered lists of assignments and activities, and to give them extra time for organizing their materials. They're going to be slower at this task because it's more challenging for them. In terms of planning and prioritizing, this is very difficult for kids with ADHD. So you want to, as I said, discuss a strategy for approaching homework, the best order for doing that homework, and perhaps that's something you do at the beginning of every homework period in your house. So you're going to explicitly teach them planning strategies and how to break assignments down into parts. how to create an assignment calendar. This is really important for kids with ADHD, and it's very hard for them. And if they're expected to write what's on the board in their planner, someone has to check the planner every day to make sure that the translation from the board to the planner is correct. Because sometimes they'll write, read, but not how many pages, or do your math, but not what the assignment is, or, finish science. What part of science? So we have to actually make sure that the instructions are being replicated. I worked with a boy who really had a lot of difficulty with this, and we decided that he could use his iPad, which he was using for keyboarding, to take a picture of the assignments every day. And then he would go home and he would, look at the picture, and he was able to either print that out or he copied it from the picture before he did his homework. It's important for kids to learn how to use calendars early on, because that's how we want older kids to manage themselves. I worked with a girl today, and she told me that she just decided that she was going to, we talked about this, and she agreed to use Google Calendar. And now each of her classes is a different color, and then she put in when she's working, and then she put in study chunks. And she came in this week, and she's been doing it for, only a week, but I've had many other college students do this, and they've said, oh my God, I'm not so worried anymore. So she never really adequately learned to do that earlier. So we want to try to help your kids now figure out how to make a calendar. A lot of kids, what happens is they know what they have, these things that they need to do, and they make a list, but then they can't prioritize it. So you might need to assist your child, and probably you should assist your child in prioritizing what they have to do, what the order is, and what the plan is for breaking it down into doable steps. So again, I want to remind you about avoiding the homework hassle, not creating it. You're going to create family work time. And this is a time where everybody's at the table together. And then you're going to determine the ideal order of work, discuss the flow of working style. If you like to get into hyperfocus and stay there, then talk about the idea that your brain gets tired. So after an hour, there's a mandatory brain break. Your brain needs to take a break. In fact, you yourself may notice when you're in the thick of a project and you get up and you have to take a shower because you have to leave in an hour, and you take your shower. While you're taking your shower, your brain is still cooking. The ideas are still maturing in there. And so that's what why we have to take a break, and why hyperfocus isn't particularly useful. One of the things that kids with ADHD do is they switch between subjects when they're bored. That's okay as long as it's a conscious choice. It's not okay to switch between screens. And so what happens is, in a lot of schools today, they have Google School. Some teachers use Google School and some teachers don't. And so you're a kid with ADHD, you go to Google School, your homework's there, you follow that, but then you forgot that your chemistry teacher doesn't use Google School and has their own website. So what's useful is being able to print out your assignments and look at them, and then work on the computer if that's what makes sense, or work on the computer and, print out the worksheet and keep the assignment on the computer. When you switch between tabs, you're doing that switching. And because of working memory and processing challenges, your kids are not holding on to the things that they need to remember while they're switching. It's important that they keep all their work on one browser and whatever fun stuff they have going on another. If your child likes to listen to music, that's fine. It's on a separate browser, only to be edited during break time. So you're going to make a structured plan that includes timed, pre-planned breaks with incentives that matter, and timed, pre-planned timed pre-planned breaks with incentives that matter. And those can be, maybe riding the exercise bike for 5 minutes, shooting hoops, running around the living room, drawing something, coloring, eating, talking to the pet, whatever. And then you're going to use cues to help you get back to where you were in the work. So for older kids in particular, take a Post-it and write what you were doing, put it on your work. put it on your screen, put it on your computer. So when you come back, you say, oh, okay, this is where I was. So you don't feel a sense of confusion. Stay out of the work, it's theirs. As hard as that may be for you. And if you're really struggling with that, talk to their teacher about what your role is and how you can assist them. So I'd love to take some questions. You'll see in your handout that I've given you 2 forms, homework forms. One is for elementary school students, and I thought one was for high school students. It's possible that you may have gotten 2 of the same forms. I'm sorry about that. They're essentially pretty much the same, but the title was different. So if that's correct, did I put 2 homework forms that were the same homework forms in your folder, or they're 2 different ones? Okay, great, terrific. All right, so tell me about some of the challenges you're having with your kids around school. I'd really like to hear, and let's see if we can help each other out. Wow, no questions? Really? Any comments about the idea of family work time? Is that something you can do? Is that something that sounds feasible? Your kids are not getting homework yet. You're trying it. What are you trying, Justine? I love the idea of family work time. I tried the family work time and it has helped a little bit. Okay, what's helped and what's not working? Every afternoon is different for my son, so it's hard to do something like this. Does your son have activities, Chris, and sports? Because if that's the case, then maybe the school study time, what you could do is have a whiteboard, because are his activities the same time each week, each day, in which case you could have changing times, but the plan when you're actually doing the work is consistent. 2 days he goes to my mom's, 1 day he's at home with his dad, 1 day he gets out earlier. So what do you think it would be like to create a plan that is that takes into account these different days and has some kind of program for each of the days? The study program or component is similar, but the day is different. Let's see. You said that family time sounds great. The problem is that I'm a teacher and I work all night too. So I think the thing is that for when the best thing to do is for you to do your work with your son or daughter, and then take a break, help them go to bed, and then probably go back to your work. That sounds really challenging. I have a hard time getting him to start and settle down, even if I give him time to relax right after school. Okay, Chris, good. I want to know how that works. What I would encourage you to do is really think about a whiteboard with the days of the week and what the options are, how you're going to organize that. Kelly, I'm sorry, can you remind me how old your child is? I don't have that in front of me. Usually it's hard for kids he's 10, okay. So usually what happens is they come home from school and they have to get all their yayas out, right? I had a little boy, he would come home from school every day and he would roll around on the kitchen floor, and the mother would be like, he's rolling around on the floor, I need to make dinner. And he's like, I have to get my flippy floppy time. And so, I love that story, because then what we did was we instituted 5 minutes of family flippy floppy time. So mom did some stretching, he did his rolling around in the living room with the coffee table moved. They all did something. And then there was a transition into what the making dinner and the next phase. So, if he comes home from school and settles down, and it's hard for him to settle down, let's talk about creating an incentive program. You can have 15 minutes of chill time. And then if you do your homework, you're going to get, a bigger incentive. Maybe that's when the screen time kicks in. Perhaps he's a kid who needs to start with the easy stuff, or start small, do 5 minutes, have success with that, then do 10 minutes. For him, it might be hard just to, ease back into it. It's really challenging for some kids to get started after school because they're just sick of it. They're sick of work and study. Let's see. There was a question here. Laura says your kids aren't getting homework yet. Lucky for you. Some schools don't give homework. I once had a mother, her child was in 5th grade, and she was so upset. She's like, why do you have to give homework on Halloween? It's Halloween. Like, can't a child just have Halloween? And, there was a point to that. I mean, she's a kid with ADHD. They were all excited, all revved up about Halloween, and which of course is next week. And, they had to do their homework first before they could go out. So Laura, you're worried about how 7th grade will be. So what I understand then is they don't have homework in 6th grade very much, but in 7th grade, they'll start to get homework. And, one of the best ways to combat that kind of worry is to plan for it. And so I'm wondering if, in the spring of 6th grade, they ramp it up a little bit, or if there's just no homework in elementary school, in which case it would be great before your daughter goes to 7th grade to make sure that she has accommodations that are appropriate for her so that she can kind of transition into understanding how to do homework and managing it more effectively, because it will be kind of a shock to her system. Any other questions? I'm sorry, any more questions? Yes, exactly, thanks. All right, let's take a few more questions. We have 3 more minutes. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, there was a noise in another room, which I didn't want you to hear. I apologize. This is my home office, so sometimes we have things. So what is your take on online schools for our kinds of kids? That's a great question. So let's see. There's that question. My son will do homework, but if I'm not there to make sure he does, he would forget. How can I make him start on his own? How old is your son, Emily? Because if they're in elementary school, 14. Yeah, 14. So remember how we talked about the 3-year gap? So really, in some ways, he's like 11 in this department, and you wouldn't necessarily expect an 11-year-old to do work on their own, particularly if they hate it. So maybe for now, just sort of surrender to the fact that you need to do that family work time, and in another year, he very well might be able to do some of his work on his own more readily. He's just not there yet. And I think that's a really important thing I want to say to all of you. Yet. The concept of yet. They're not there yet. Doesn't mean they won't get there. They're just not there yet. What is my take? I stepped away from the computer for a sec earlier. What did you say? A clock that changes color? Oh, it's a time timer. You can order it online. And my take on online schools. So I think, if you're homeschooling your kids, online schools can be helpful for some subjects. I do think that there are a lot of homeschooling groups, and those are really important for kids with ADHD because they help with socializing. Of course, Khan Academy can be useful for building skills, and because kids like computer games, it could be kind of a win-win thing. Sometimes I'm scared that school is crushing my kids' spirit and self-esteem. Oh, that makes me sad. I hear you. I bet these other parents share your concern. I think you'd said that your child likes snack, recess, and I'm just going back to look at that. Was it your child who said snack, recess, and gym? Oh, okay, art is her thing. So thank you. Technology is our friend sometimes and a little challenging. So, I think for kids, particularly who are artists and have artistic sensibilities, it's really important that they take as many of those classes as possible, that they have enrichment outside of school, and, you know, to sort of lay off the academics and the pressure of the academics, and to really, you know, lean into and beef up their artistic gifts and your pride in their artistic gifts. And, you know, essentially, if for a kid who is walking the path of an artist, they're going to go, you know, if they go to art school, they have to have, you know, these academic, you know, boxes ticked off. But ultimately, it's about their creativity and what the work that they're making. And so, you know, try to shore that up on the other side. And I would really encourage all of you to talk to your kids' teachers about celebration. Now, what I mean by that is positivity in the classroom. These kids are constantly running a conversation in their heads about how they don't measure up, and they don't compare and they don't kind of compare favorably with their peers. I had one boy say everybody got their you know, I guess it was a reading test, you know, a book that they had read and stuff, and everyone got the test. All his friends who were sitting near him got A's or A minuses or B pluses, and he got a C minus. He shoved his in his desk and didn't show anybody. You know, I think it's important that we do what we can. You know, kids are resilient, and I think the more supportive you can be at home, if your daughter has an adjustment counselor, a teacher at school who is her mentor or coach, that will make a huge difference. Everybody needs to feel like they have an ally when they walk into school. Who is your child's ally? Does your child know that? Does your child have access to that ally on a regular basis? If your child is struggling, can they go talk to that ally to help them manage? This is important for you to figure out, and for them to know that they have that option. So we are at our time. Is there a last question? I'll take one more question if you want. Anybody have one more question about school? Okay. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. We will meet next week at 8 o'clock, and we will be talking about ADHD and life at home, which is always a challenge. Please feel free to send me any questions in advance. If you are after tonight's class, and when you get the video, if you're watching this and you think, oh, I forgot to ask this question, email it to me and I'll answer it at the beginning of the next class. If you have specific questions about life at home with ADHD that you want to make sure I address, please make sure you email those to me as well. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great evening. Wonderful to share this time with you.